Hello everyone, I'm Pete Trabucco, book author, travel expert, and don't go anywhere because Profiles is coming right up.
Welcome to Profiles, I'm Mickey Burns. Today's guest is radio host and author Pete Trabucco. His latest book is titled America's Top Roller Coasters and Amusement Parks. Pete traveled the country looking for the biggest, fastest, and most thrilling roller coasters in the United States. In his book, he gives a comprehensive overview of them all. After a short break, I'll be back to welcome Pete Trabucco to Profiles. Welcome back to Profiles, I'm Mickey Burns. When he's not writing books, today's guest, Pete Trabucco, is also a TV and radio host. He recently hosted the TV show Thrill Ride Maniacs. Currently, Pete hosts his own radio show called The Weekly Rush out of Philadelphia. On the program, he interviews many of the newsmakers of the day. So join me now as I welcome radio host and author Pete Trabucco to Profiles. Pete Trabucco, welcome to our show, Profiles.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it so much.
It's a pleasure having you here. You are a radio host and an author and many other things, but let's first start out with your books.
Yes.
Because I know you had a very popular one. It was called America's Top Roller Coasters and Amusement Parks. That was a few years ago. And now after that, you followed it up with another one,
yes,
which was called what?
A Personal Guide to the Best Amusement Parks and Water Parks. And I used a personal guide because on the first one, I used America's top roller coasters.
Yes.
And people were complaining that their roller coaster was not in there. Giada, for example, on the Food Network,
yeah,
when I was doing something with her, she complained that her roller coaster was not in that book. So I decided to do a personal guide, which means it's the roller coasters that I actually did. And yes, I did include the roller coaster that she had. I made sure to go to California and ride that roller coaster.
Now, two questions. One, how did your interest in roller coasters originate? And did you actually travel the country and try out all these different roller coasters?
We absolutely have to. Actually, I was afraid of roller coasters and we're from New York, so Coney Island, and I won't mention the Cyclone because it was actually a little rinky-dink 5-foot drop roller coaster at Seaside Boulevard.
Oh, wow.
And that was on Staten Island. I was very young. I didn't want to do roller coasters, and I became afraid of them. And for the next 35, 40 years, I never rode in one coaster at all. Now, in the meantime, I became a pilot, learned to do avionics, acrobatics, roop-de-loops. I've done pretty much all that stuff. But as a childhood fear, I still made sure that I stayed away from roller coasters. I held a lot of purses, for my family, and whatever. But my daughter was born in, I guess it was around 1996. I decided that I was going to overcome that fear, and I decided to start to put together a log of all the roller coasters I did.
Yeah, what was the key to overcoming the fear?
Labor of love. I wanted to make sure that I would be able to ride with my daughter and not go through that fear. And I wanted to make sure I would do that. So I used the same things. By the way, I'm afraid of heights, and I became a pilot. I used the same, protocol that you would do there to overcome my fear. So eventually, when I started to ride the roller coasters, I realized, well, they're safe, number one, and number two, it's sort of like flying. It basically is very, very similar to what you do when you're in an airplane. But at the same time, it's much safer. So the bottom line is I put together a logbook, and someone looked at the logbook and says, you really did a lot of roller coasters. Maybe you should write a book about it. And I did, America's Top Roller Coasters and Amusement Parks, and that was in 2009.
Wow, wow. Now, I read somewhere in doing the research for this interview that the most dangerous roller coaster in the world, could be accurate or not, is right here in our backyard at Six Flags in Jackson, New Jersey. It's called King da Ka.
I wouldn't say it's the most dangerous. It is a very fantastic ride. Too short for my taste, but it will take you from 0 to 128 miles an hour in 3 seconds. If you really want to know what it's like to be shot off an aircraft carrier without a cockpit, without glass, without even a vehicle, that's pretty much very similar to what goes on there. It is a great ride. It's a little rough for my taste, but it is a fantastic
It's
ride.
also 45 stories high.
440 feet.
Wow. In your opinion, in doing your research, what do you consider to be the best roller coaster in the world?
It's on my first book. It's Millennium Force. It was
Where is
built,
that?
That's in Sandusky, Ohio.
Okay.
Cedar Point, on the peninsula there, which, by the way, is a roller coaster mecca for anybody who loves roller coasters. That's where everyone normally will go. This ride is only 300 feet high, but it goes about 90, 95 feet, and it's, when most rides are stopping, it actually is just turning around and coming back. So it's a long ride, it's fast, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh, man. Okay. Interestingly, about 4 deaths a year are associated with roller coasters. What do you think attributed to those deaths?
Well, it's mostly rider error. In other words, what happens is
Really?
oh, absolutely. Most of the times, 99.5% of the time, it's going to be that the rider leaves a little slack between their restraint system. Very rarely is it actually a situation where your chances of getting into, and I talk about this on radio and television all the time, your chances are about 1 in 400 million that you'll get into a fatality going to an amusement park. It's only 1 in 35,000 when you're driving from here to the local store.
Sure.
So it's you'd have to be hit twice by lightning. It's much less than that as well.
Sure. Now, you also hosted a show, Thrill Ride Maniacs.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that experience?
Well, imagine starting a show, not just roller coasters, but thrill rides, jumping out of airplanes, basically going in go-karts that go 60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
The Vomit Comet, that's negative G in an airplane for 30 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
Putting together people from all walks of life to actually have some fun, get together. It could be a CEO of a major company and maybe somebody working at a fast food restaurant who have this in common. They want to be able to get that pucker factor going, do something interesting. And that was what we decided to do with Thrill Ride Maniacs.
Wow. Yeah. You're also an expert on water parks. Where are the best ones located?
Well, you got Schlitterbahn, which is in Texas, which is an amazing, fantastic amusement park. Schlitterbahn is the biggest in the world. There's also Noah's Ark, which is in Michigan.
Right.
Michigan is another place where it's great.
Yeah, and what makes them the best?
Well, they're number one, they're safe. Number two, you've got rides and attractions that actually rival roller coasters coming down to 50 and 60 miles an hour. There's many of them. The parks is so big that there's not many lines. The lines are much shorter. Plus, these are Midwest or down in southern United States. It's not like being in the Northeast where everything is crowded. So you end up having a lot of people having a lot of fun on rides that really there's not much of a line for.
No, that's big, really. Now, I know you're also currently working on another book. And this book is going to be devoted to ballparks, football stadiums, and the majestic cathedrals of sport. Yes. How deep are you into writing the book?
Well, there's several things I enjoy when I travel a lot in the aviation industry, and I love to ride amusement parks. I go to amusement parks and ride rides. Yeah. But I also love going to Wrigley Field or Fenway Park.
Those are the older
all the
ballparks.
old ones or the new ones. Whenever I'm in a town, I would be able to do that and have some time maybe to catch a baseball, football, or basketball. And you know, the stadiums that we create are just amazing monuments. They're cathedrals of sports. So what I wanted to always do was put together a picture book similar to your book that's coming out.
Coffee table book.
Coffee table book with pictures of just the rides and in this case pictures of all the different amusement parks and ballparks.
Some of the football stadiums that they built, the one in Dallas is incredible.
It's the biggest one.
And the one they just built in Las Vegas is another one. They're enormous.
100,000 plus and much bigger than you expect. And of course, if you go to Beaver Stadium, which is in Pennsylvania for Penn State, that's over 100,000. So these stadiums are massive. They're beautiful. I just recently came from Notre Dame Stadium, went from 60,000 to 80,000.
Well, I think
University
of Michigan is 100,000.
Yes.
Enormous.
Most of the big stadiums, or the Big Ten, they're all over 100,000 at this point.
Wow.
And they're suffering because of the pandemic, obviously.
Sure. We're also a radio host. And your show in Philly is called The Weekly Rush.
Yes.
And it's on WWDB AM 860. Now, on your show, you interview hundreds of people, many newsmakers of the day. But as a radio host, what would you consider to be the most rewarding part of what you do?
Well, as you know, I've done literally thousands of interviews on the other end,
Yeah, I know
being
you have.
interviewed.
Yes.
And I hadn't done radio in about maybe 20 years where I was actually a host or a radio disc jockey. And one of the things I love about it is learning the information about these people. Yeah, you can do research on them, but then during the interview, they always come up with something that you did not know and something that's extreme. Exactly. And it's interesting and it's so much fun, these celebrities. I've actually tried to model my show like profiles and in order to know how to do that.
Well, Pete, I'm very flattered.
Although I have a wacky co-host that basically sometimes she has her own little plan, so it becomes a very interesting show.
Okay, all right.
Overall, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you've interviewed hundreds of people, but you've also been interviewed hundreds of times for your books.
Yes.
And you're an expert with the parks and so forth. What do you find? What are you most comfortable at doing? Interviewing or being interviewed?
Actually, being the interviewer is more difficult, and I've learned that than it actually is when you're actually being interviewed. Because
and why is that?
Because a lot of times, and you know, you've been doing this for years, you have to be quick-witted on questions and go with whatever the answer is and go from there. Whereas if you're just lobbing questions at me, it's really easy for me to understand what's going to come next and follow the host. There was this one time on the Fox Business Channel, Alex Witt, where unfortunately I got some makeup in my eye during the interview. And during the entire interview, I'm actually winking at her. And she kept at the end, she was like, "Why were you winking at me during the interview?"
And I had makeup in my eye.
And I had to tell her there was makeup in my eye. I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah, that's funny. As a radio host with your show, what do you hope that the fans and people who are listening in each week, what do you hope they leave with?
I want them to know not just the personalities, and of course we have personalities, you know, like Ron Jaworski and Cool from Cool and the Gang and so on. And I want them to know a little bit about these individuals that maybe no one knew about, or interesting information, because everyone knows, you know, pretty much if you just Google somebody or go Wikipedia, you can find out the information. But I like to hear personal stories about what's happened in their life and what makes them, what humanizes them, so that when the people that are listening can say, you know, I can do that. I have a lot of songwriters and singers who, you know, just made it or in the process of making or have already made it. And you hear their stories. How many people try to give up? Whereas they didn't. They stuck with it. And what they do is it's motivation for the listeners and for the people and for myself.
And inspiration.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can learn something. Do you learn something from almost every guest you've had on your show?
I absolutely do. I have a little notebook. I actually write things down.
No kidding.
Absolutely. You know, if they have a nice phrase or something along the lines, I will incorporate it into my life.
That's interesting. Wow. Now, on your show, as you've had so many guests on it, from all walks of life.
Not as many as you.
Well, you've had many. Are there a couple for you that stand out and are the most memorable or maybe the most impactful to you personally?
Yes, actually there's a couple. Cool comes to mind from Cool and the Gang because of the fact that he's had some loss in his family.
He has.
They went through a lot in order to get to where they were at. And it's just a very, very heartwarming story of how the new song they've come out with is representative of his brother. And that was an amazing story. Ron Jaworski, who is an amazing quarterback, is involved in so many golf outings to help out people and things along those lines.
Giving back.
He's giving back. And my cousin, Peggy Lee Brennan, was on the show. She happened to be on MASH. She was actually one of the nurses who Radar O'Reilly fell in love with. And she's a very religious person. And every time she comes on the show, she'll talk about you know, what motivates her and just you know, the beliefs that she has as a religious person. Very, very nice to have her on as well.
Yeah. I read somewhere that you also were an astronaut for a day. You know, how did that come about? And tell us what the experience was like.
Mickey, I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none
You're
of them.
a Renaissance man.
That is correct.
You're a Renaissance
That is correct. I actually met somebody who happened to be, at the time he was an astronaut, Ken Ham, but he hadn't flown yet.
Right.
I met him at a New Year's Eve party, and I was bragging about how I was a pilot and I did all this aerobatics, and he just sat there and talked like he was just a normal person. Finally, I asked him, I said, what airplane or which aircraft do you fly? He said F-18. And then he said, I also fly the T-38. Now, the T-38 is only flown by astronauts at this time. So I asked him, are you an astronaut? It was kind of like, yeah, I am. And a friendship ensued at that point.
Wow.
And when he went up for STS-124 as the shuttle pilot, he invited me to with his family to cover the launch, pictures and all.
Wow.
And then again, when he became the commander in STS-132, that was the Atlantis flight, he was the commander of the flight. And I ended up becoming an astronaut for a full day with 7 launches and 7 re-entries in the actual space shuttle full motion simulator. I would say that we only landed 6 times because the 7th time, mission control and also the astronauts couldn't figure out what the problem was, and we had burnt up in the atmosphere.
Really?
So it was a very serious moment in the actual main cabin with these people upside down going through the whole process. And I tell you, what you saw on Apollo 13 during that incident is exactly what happens in the space shuttle. The alarms go off and you're trying to figure out what's happening.
Wow.
And you're going a mile a minute between you and mission control to try to come up with the solution. So it was an amazing experience. And I was lucky enough to also cover the last space shuttle mission, STS-135, the last ones to go into space. And Ed Hurley, who happened to be the assistant or the actual pilot commander on that ship, was actually in SpaceX. He was the commander for the first SpaceX mission.
Which is going well.
Which is going
But didn't they have a
extremely
problem
well.
with the landing of the last mission?
It's very difficult. I mean, the gyros have to be corrected. It's got to be done perfectly. Just the fact that they could actually do that is science fiction. It's just amazing the level that they've gotten to.
Right. And you mentioned you are a pilot.
Yes.
How did that come about, and what kind of planes have you flown?
Another story. I was afraid of roller coasters. I was afraid of flying.
Yes.
And one day my wife said to me, who happens to be my better half,
Yep.
decided that we were going to go visit people in Arizona, my relatives.
Okay.
And she said, you're getting on the plane no matter what happens. So I did, and I had the Top Gun theme in my head. We're taking off to try to get me courage.
Yeah.
And then while we're there, let's go to the Grand Canyon and let's fly in a little airplane in the rim. That's when you can go below the rim. And she convinced me to do that as well.
Okay.
And once I was in there flying at the Grand Canyon underneath the rim and looking at these small planes, I looked over to my wife and I said, I'm going to learn to fly.
Wow.
And at that point, I got involved in that. I got involved with the Air Force Auxiliary, started flying T-34 Mentors, and then got into aerobatics when I started to do, training with Michael Goulian, who happened to be one of these Red Bull air racers.
Right.
He was contracted to our company to do air shows. And while he was doing the air shows, he would say, Pete, you want to learn how to fly and do. And that's, I learned everything. I learned everything that he did, much slower pace. Right. But everything, loop-the-loops, Edelmans, barrel rolls.
I see you have your wings.
I've got my wings.
Quite an honor.
It is an honor. It took a while to go, and I owe them all to my wife. Thank you very much.
That's great. That's great. As I mentioned, I consider you a Renaissance man, and you're also an actor. A budding actor. How's that? Is budding a good term?
I always say it's just for fun. I started out doing that, and I've done some off-Broadway stuff, nothing major. But I started off being a theater dad, because my daughter was in it.
Okay.
And then she ended up leaving that and doing other things, but for some reason they needed people to do shows, so I did regional, and I ended up doing community theater, and this will be the first year I've not actually done a Christmas show. I did Elf last year, and the year before I did White Christmas, and I unfortunately am sad about that.
What's your best piece of advice for people to overcome their current fear of flying? Is there any advice that you can give them?
Well, and I had a fear of flying, and basically in any fear, and it's in both my books. It's how to overcome your fear of everything. And I guess my motto is take it head on. Don't be afraid of it. It will grow, as my childhood fear did about flying and riding roller coasters. The longer you wait, the harder it is. So, take it head on, and before you know it, it's nothing like you experienced. I mean, you might want to take it in little steps, in little baby steps.
How would you do that?
Well, it depends. In flying, I would probably do short trips, maybe from
okay,
New York to
Philadelphia.
Boston, New York to maybe Cleveland. Okay. It's a 2-hour ride or whatever, even shorter, and then start going. I wouldn't go from here to Hawaii, because that would be a little more.
You can't get out. You can't get out. You're
so start small. On roller coasters, the same thing. Start small, build it up, and realize that it's all in your head.
Right.
If you overcome your fear, you feel so much better about yourself that you can actually accomplish things. You say to yourself, what's next? Yeah. What fear can I overcome?
Yeah, let's go. That's good advice, Pete. Now, as busy as you are in all the things that you do, I know one of the things you're most proud of is your work with the American Heart Association, not only here in the States, but worldwide, in the use of AEDs. Explain to us the work that you do and why this is so important.
Well, back in 1998, the American Heart Association came to me and wanted me, I had some political background both on the GOP and the Democratic side, and they wanted to get these bills passed for the automated external defibrillators, which of course save hundreds of thousands of lives a year. And they were going to use New Jersey as a pilot program to get that board. Then, of course, New York City and so on, all 50 states. So my job was to convince the government, as you say, the State House, to know how safe these individuals are, how safe these units are. We were able to do that, get some expert people in there. I did a lot of talks across the country, but mostly in New Jersey with Fortune 5s. And once the bill got passed, we were able to hit Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and IBM and all the major companies to get the units across. And it's been, for me, the most important thing I've ever done was to be able to talk like a doctor. I only played one. Okay, to talk about VTAC, VFib, or bradycardia, and how important it is to have these units, and they're everywhere now, airports and so on.
It's important, and they are everywhere, and you see them everywhere. How important is it also to know how to operate them?
Well, they're very easy to operate. If I could do it, Mickey, anyone can do it. Yeah, they are extremely, in fact, at one time I actually got tired of doing it. I was doing some kind of Fortune 500 presentation in front of about 1,000 people. I had my little daughter, 6 years old, come on stage. I said I was getting very tired of doing it. Of course, she was coached a little bit, but she walked up and she did the old Arnold Horshack thing, ooh, 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 ooh. I picked up, and she came up and she actually did the actual full shocking. That turned a lot of heads, because if a 6-year-old can do it,
anybody can do it.
Yes.
Well, that's well said. Now, as I said prior, all the things that you've done in your life and continue to do many of them, how would you describe your life's journey up to this point?
You know, it's been a roller coaster ride, basically, as they say. Sorry to use the pun.
Very good.
But you know, I started out doing some things. Obviously, you were, and I got to bring it up. You were a coach at my high school, and I remember you used to yell at me every once in a while. But I've gone and I've learned.
Sorry, Pete.
I've actually learned from people, my coaches and my teachers and my instructors, especially my flight instructor, who I put new grooves in the yoke because I was so nervous from flying. But you learn a lot from people, and the key to life is learning from everyone, whether they're your elder or whether they're somebody who's just coming up. You can always learn things. So my life has been basically a learning experience. I continue to learn every single day. And I think that's the most important factor in life, is never just you know, put those blinders on and go straight ahead. Look around. Smell the coffee, enjoy yourself. We have a pandemic going on, but you know, even though we do, we have a vaccine, and things are starting to look up. So look towards the bright side in everything.
Years from now, when you reflect back, what do you hope your legacy will be?
I hope my legacy is the fact that 100,000 or several 100,000 lives are being saved by defibrillators. It's now worldwide. And that the program, I still do things for American Heart Association. I still am an instructor, and I still do first aid, CPR, and AED courses. And I think the most important factor for me is that's the best thing I've ever done. Of course, being a father and a husband. Hopefully a great husband or a good husband. Those are the things that are most important. But I think that's the thing I enjoy the most, is being able to touch so many lives. And if we can all do that in some way, I think that's a feather in everyone's cap.
Well, I want to say one more time, thank you so much for stopping by Profiles today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, because you are a real expert in so many areas, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you so much, Mickey. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Coach.
Continued success. Pete is also a media travel expert and appears frequently on TV and radio programs, giving tips on how to make traveling less stressful and more cost-effective. Additionally, Pete is currently working on his next book that will be devoted to ballparks, football stadiums, and the majestic cathedrals of sport. Well, that's about all the time we have left on this edition of Profiles. Until next time, I'm Mickey Burns. Thanks for tuning in.